On a warm August night in 1982, a Catholic priest in Santa Fe received a desperate phone call. A man claimed his grandfather was dying on the outskirts of town and needed last rites. Always faithful, Father Reynaldo Rivera agreed to help. He was never seen alive again. 2 days later, his body was found near a lonely New Mexico rest stop, bound, shot, and left in the dirt. The clues were chilling, the motive unclear, and the trail has stayed cold for more than 40 years. Who lured Father Rivera into the desert, and why? Welcome to Bad Things. Join us as we trace the events, examine the theories, and ask what most likely happened. The call. On the evening of August 5th, 1982, a call came into the rectory of St. Francis Cathedral in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A man identifying himself as Michael Carmelo said his grandfather was gravely ill in a rural area near the ghost town of Waldo. He requested a priest to administer last rites. Father Patrick Gerard answered the call first. Due to his poor night vision, he asked the caller to try again later for another priest. A short time afterward, the phone rang again. This time, Father Reynaldo Rivera, a 57-year-old Franciscan priest known for his kindness and dedication, took the call. Carmelo asked Father Rivera to meet him at the La Bajada rest stop along Interstate 25, about 20 miles southwest of Santa Fe. He said he'd be waiting in a blue pickup truck to lead the priest to the house where his grandfather lay dying. Father Rivera told staff he would return shortly. He brought his leather sacrament case containing holy oils and his crucifix, got into his brown 1974 Chevrolet Malibu, and drove off into the night. He never came back. A city in mourning. When Father Rivera failed to return that night or the following morning, concern turned to alarm. A search was launched by church officials and police. On August 7th, 2 days after he disappeared, his body was found off a remote dirt road east of the Waldo exit, not far from where he was supposed to meet the caller. Father Rivera had been shot once in the chest or abdomen, though reports varied. His hands were bound, and he had a deep ligature mark around his neck, indicating he had been strangled, possibly with a wire or a coat hanger. It was clear that he had not simply been killed, but restrained, tortured, and executed. The city of Santa Fe went into collective shock. Thousands attended his funeral, and clergy across the region expressed disbelief that such a respected and gentle priest could meet such a fate. A carefully planned trap. Investigators quickly determined that Michael Carmelo was an alias. The story he gave about waiting at the La Bajada rest stop fell apart when it was discovered the payphone there was out of service at the time. The call must have come from elsewhere, indicating a deliberate lie and premeditation. Father Rivera's Chevrolet was also missing from the scene. It was located several days later, abandoned at a rest stop off Interstate 40 near Grants, New Mexico, roughly 100 miles west. The gas tank was empty, the doors were locked, and inside the car had been meticulously wiped down. No fingerprints, no blood, no belongings. The car had clearly been sanitized. The keys were gone, as were Father Rivera's glasses, wallet, keychain, and his sacrament kit, the only item believed to have been intentionally taken. Nothing of monetary value was missing. Robbery was not the motive. Theories begin to form. From early on, police believed more than one person had been involved. Lieutenant Gilberto Libari of the New Mexico State Police, who led the investigation, believed at least 2 individuals confronted Rivera, one possibly pretending to be Carmelo, while the other waited nearby. Armed, they likely forced him into a second vehicle at the rest stop. There had to be more than one person, Ulibarri later said, and they had to know what they were doing. It's believed Father Rivera was murdered in a separate remote location, then transported and left where he was found, close enough to the highway that his body would be discovered. Afterward, the killers appear to have returned to La Bajada, retrieved his car and driven it to Grant's, likely as a diversion tactic. Whoever planned this crime had thought through the logistics: fake name, fake story, multiple vehicles, false location, careful cleanup, and calculated misdirection. No leads, few clues. Despite intense effort from state and federal authorities, the case yielded very little forensic evidence. FBI profilers suggested the motive was likely revenge and that the suspect harbored a personal grudge against the Catholic Church, not necessarily against Father Rivera specifically. A Catholic priest was the target, for whatever reason, Ulibarri later said. Over the months that followed, investigators chased multiple leads. Fingerprints found in the car were compared to those of a recently released convict in the area. No match. 2 suspects in a similar Arizona priest murder were ruled out. Other suspects in Texas and California priest killings were examined and cleared. One person of interest, George Semkes, a former Santa Fe resident and known church thief, had allegedly vowed to settle things with clergy after a falling out. Semkes fit the FBI profile, was reportedly in the area at the time, and had a prior grudge involving the Franciscans. Still, no physical evidence linked him to the crime. By 1984, the case had stalled. A haunting parallel. Then came a strange twist. In July 1984, Father John Kerrigan, a 58-year-old priest in Ronan, Montana, vanished under similarly disturbing circumstances. His bloody clothes were found folded beside a highway near a bent metal coat hanger. His car was discovered abandoned with blood inside the vehicle and trunk, but his body was never found. His wallet, containing over $1,000 in cash, was untouched. The similarities were hard to ignore. Both priests were in their late 50s. Both disappeared after nighttime events. Both drove brown Chevrolet sedans. Both cases involved a wire or hanger. Neither involved theft. And both occurred in remote western states, 2 years apart. Lieutenant Ulibarri believed the cases were related and floated the idea of a serial priest killer, possibly a drifter with a vendetta. The idea gained public traction when Unsolved Mysteries profiled both men in the late 1980s, referring to the incidents as the Franciscan priest murders. But the theory of a connection would not hold. Over time, investigators noted significant differences. Father Rivera's body was left out in the open. Father Kerrigan's was never found. Rivera's car was clean and moved post-mortem. Kerrigan's was bloody. Most notably, in 2015 it was revealed that Father Kerrigan had a history of sexual abuse allegations, while Father Rivera had none. The initial hope that Rivera's case might be part of a solvable pattern gave way to the reality that this was likely an isolated and intentional act. Today, Father Reynaldo Rivera's murder remains officially unsolved. A cold case with no arrests, no public suspects, and no closure. But what did come next were the theories. Over the years, 4 main theories have emerged in the search for meaning behind Father Rivera's brutal killing. Number 1. A serial predator targeting priests. When Father John Kerrigan vanished in 1984, 2 years after Rivera's murder, some investigators feared they were seeing a pattern. Both priests were older, Catholic and Franciscan. Both disappeared at night in rural western states. Both drove brown Chevrolets. Both were apparently bound with some kind of wire. The similarities sparked fears of a serial clergy killer. Lieutenant Gilbert Ulibarri, who led Rivera's investigation, was one of the first to publicly float the theory. He believed a drifter with psychological issues might be targeting priests. In his view, The killer may have struck in New Mexico, then Montana, and possibly elsewhere. "I hoped to see more cases surface," Ulibarri said in an interview years later. "It would have helped us build a pattern." Several other disturbing incidents seem to support this possibility. In November 1982, Father Ben Carrier was found strangled in a Yuma, Arizona motel room, his hands bound with electrical tape. Witnesses reported seeing two young men, possibly hitchhikers, with him. In Texas, Father Patrick Ryan was murdered in an Odessa motel in 1981. Although someone was convicted in that case, doubts about the man's guilt remain. And in December 1982, a man using the name William L. Toomey died by suicide in an Idaho church, leaving behind a note and a large sum of cash. His identity was never confirmed, but Toomey was also the name of a company that manufactured priest vestments, fueling speculation he was either a defrocked priest or someone connected to clergy crimes. While these cases varied in detail, they shared enough eerie overlaps to support the theory of a wandering killer with a clergy fixation. But ultimately, no forensic evidence connected Rivera's murder to any of the others. The FBI, after years of comparison, found no ballistic, DNA, or signature patterns linking the crimes. By the 1990s, even Ulibarri distanced himself from the serial killer angle. "There is no connection whatsoever," he said in 1992. Still, for some, the theory holds emotional weight. A wandering predator, acting out some deep-seated rage against priests, might explain why two good men vanished under similar circumstances. But the theory, after decades of digging, remains just that, a theory. Number 2. Revenge from within the church's orbit. Another major theory is that Father Rivera wasn't targeted randomly at all, but rather by someone with direct ties to the church, possibly seeking revenge. This theory is grounded in the FBI's original profile, which stated the killer likely had a personal vendetta against the Catholic Church, possibly stemming from past trauma. The individual understood the process of last rites, knew a priest would come alone, and took the sacrament kit, a symbolically loaded trophy. One explanation: vigilante justice. In 2015, it was revealed that Father John Kerrigan, previously thought to be a second victim, had a decades-long record of sexually abusing minors. He had been moved between 13 parishes in 30 years. That revelation led many to wonder, was Kerrigan killed by a victim or someone close to one? And if so, was Rivera? Crucially, there are no known allegations against Father Rivera himself. By all accounts, he was well-liked, respected, and dedicated to his parishioners. But some suggest he may have been a proxy, killed not for personal wrongdoing, but as a stand-in for a church that failed others. This was personal revenge, one online commentator wrote. Not against him, against what he represented. Others have pointed to unconfirmed local rumors about Rivera's time in Clovis, New Mexico, with one person claiming Rivera had a huge interest in us as children. But no formal accusations, lawsuits, or credible sources support this. His fellow clergy have defended his character firmly. More concretely, George Semkes, the man once investigated by Ulibarri, may represent this theory in action. Semkes had stolen a religious statue from the cathedral and reportedly felt slighted when Rivera's colleagues refused to help him avoid prison. He was overheard vowing to get revenge on the Franciscans and flew into Santa Fe on the day of the murder. Though never charged, he fits the profile, known to the church, angry, and capable. In this view, the killer was someone who knew how to reach a priest, knew how he'd respond, and used that knowledge to exact revenge. Not out of chaos, but out of something deeply personal. Number 3. Mistaken identity. A lesser-known but intriguing theory suggests that Father Rivera may not have been the intended target at all, that his death was the result of mistaken identity. Proponents of this theory point to the fact that the caller originally spoke to Father Patrick Gerard, not Rivera. That suggests any priest would do. A red flag if the motive was personal. But some speculate that the killers may have been looking for someone specific, possibly Father John Kerrigan, who had spent time in New Mexico before his disappearance in Montana. Kerrigan had reportedly received treatment at a clerical facility near Santa Fe prior to being reassigned out of state. If someone was seeking revenge against him but didn't know he'd already left, they may have assumed he was still in Santa Fe and tried to find him through the cathedral. In that case, Father Rivera may have answered a call intended for someone else. Both men were older, Catholic, and affiliated with Franciscan orders. Both drove brown Chevy cars. A determined attacker with bad information could have mistaken one for the other. As one Reddit user theorized, they were after Kerrigan. They got Rivera by accident, and when they realized they had the wrong man, they looked for the real target again, in Montana. It's a compelling framework, but it requires a killer with enough motivation to cross state lines, yet careless enough to confuse two priests. It also assumes Kerrigan was a known target in New Mexico, despite spending most of his career in Montana. Still, if the killer wasn't after Rivera personally, this theory offers a chilling possibility, that he died not because of who he was, but because of who someone thought he was. Number 4. Random or ritualistic violence. The final major theory is that Rivera was killed not for who he was, nor as a part of a pattern, but as a random act of violence, possibly with a ritualistic or ideological edge. In the early 1980s, America was in the grip of the Satanic Panic, a wave of hysteria over alleged cult activity and ritual abuse. Some early theories speculated that Rivera may have been lured and killed as part of a sacrilegious rite. During the search, his brother Fred Rivera reportedly found a nearby cave that looked like it had been used for occult practices. Early media reports fanned these flames, hinting at satanic overtones. But police found no evidence of ritual symbols or occult markings. No candles, no inscriptions, no signs of sacrifice. They publicly ruled out a satanic motive. Even so, the idea of a thrill kill or hate crime lingers. Could this have been an act by people who simply hated priests or religion itself? Under that scenario, the killers lured a priest not for revenge, not out of mistaken identity, but because it meant something to them to kill one. That might explain why the murder was calculated, but not profit-driven. Why no money was taken, yet the sacrament kit was. Police did investigate transient criminals and other violent offenders in the area at the time. A car thief and a recently paroled violent offender were both examined and ruled out. But the idea remains. What if this was violence for its own sake? As one retired officer put it was cold, planned, but maybe not personal. This theory doesn't require a known suspect or personal motive, just ideology, opportunity, and cruelty. After decades of speculation, one question still hangs over this case like desert heat. Who killed Father Reynaldo Rivera, and why? Based on the evidence, expert opinions, and the elimination of weaker possibilities, the most likely answer is not a serial killer, not a mistaken identity, and not a satanic cult. It's far simpler and far more chilling. Father Rivera was likely murdered by one or more individuals who harbored a deep hatred toward the Catholic Church and used his role as a priest to make him a symbolic target. This was not random. It wasn't personal to Rivera, but it was personal to them. The motive: institutional hatred, not individual grudge. The clearest clue comes from the FBI's early psychological profile, which stated plainly the killer was seeking revenge and the target was a Catholic priest. For whatever reason, investigators concluded that Father Rivera was not selected because of anything he had done, but because of what he represented. The evidence supports this. The caller asked for any priest, not Rivera specifically. The careful ruse, invoking last rites, exploited a Catholic duty only a true believer or a person familiar with the church would understand. And the only item taken was his sacrament kit, a crucifix, holy oils, and other sacred objects. Not his wallet, not his car, not his ring. As Lieutenant Gilberto Libari said, this was not about money. The totality of these clues points toward ideological or emotional revenge, possibly by a former parishioner, possibly by a victim of clerical abuse, possibly by someone like George Semkes, who had known contact with the church and left with a grievance. Means, opportunity, and planning. This was a premeditated ambush, not a spontaneous crime. The suspect, or suspects, chose their moment and set the stage. Evening hours, a remote rest stop, an unreachable payphone. They used a false name and called from elsewhere, knowing the La Bajada phone was out of order. They built a lie specifically designed to manipulate a priest. At least 2 people were likely involved, as Ulibarri has long maintained. One to pose as Carmelo, the other to control Rivera or retrieve his car. The restraints, likely wire, maybe even a coat hanger, suggest a planned method. The weapon was a small firearm, probably a revolver, given the single bullet and lack of casings. Once abducted, Rivera was likely held for a time, then killed in a separate location, not the spot where his body was found. There they strangled and shot him, a brutal combination that suggests emotion, not efficient execution, rage. After the murder, the body was dumped just off the road, in a place where it would certainly be found. Not buried, not hidden, left deliberately. This too sends a message. Why this theory fits best. Let's consider the other theories. Serial killer? There's no physical evidence connecting this to any other crime, and as Ulibarri himself said in later years, I no longer believe the cases are related. Mistaken identity. This theory hinges on the idea that Rivera was confused with another priest, likely Kerrigan. But Kerrigan was in Montana, and the killer didn't care which priest answered the phone. That detail alone suggests it was any priest they wanted, not one specific man. Satanic or ritual violence? No evidence of ritual tools, symbols, or patterns. Investigators ruled this out quickly, even amid the satanic panic hysteria of the early 80s. What we're left with is a scenario that requires no great leap, no conspiracy, and no nationwide pattern. Just 1 or 2 people, possibly from the area, carrying a personal vendetta and acting it out in secret. It's the kind of theory no one likes, because it doesn't offer a grand narrative. But it explains the facts with the fewest assumptions, which is the very heart of Occam's razor. We can't say for sure who did it, but the strongest candidate archetype is someone like Semkes, a person familiar with clergy life, who felt wronged, and who had the means to fly in and disappear again. Or it could have been someone local, a victim of church abuse or the family of one, who decided to make their own form of justice. They didn't want to rob a priest, they wanted to destroy one. And they did.